Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet, coming to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. As you already know, there'll be some 9 billion citizens on the planet by 2050. What are we doing now to get ready for 2 billion new people on the planet? How are we going to feed, clothe, provide the fiber that is needed, and at the same time to bring about an ever-increasing quality of life? We have an expert that's going to be sharing with us about one megacity called New York in the United States. And before I introduce our world-winning author, I have a gentleman sitting beside me that's going to be here in case we lose Robin Shulman, who's coming in from Toronto, Canada. And this is Dennis Chestnut. Dennis has been with us before. He's the Executive Director of what's called Groundwork Anacostia River, D.C. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. And Robin is here joining us. He has produced a fantastic book, and I'm going to have to read this because there's so many words in this title, Robin, that I want to be sure I get it all. But it's called Eat the City, which I'm going to let you explain. A tale of fishers, foragers, butchers, farmers, poultry minders, sugar refiners, cane cutters, beekeepers, winemakers, and brewers who built New York City. Boy, I'm tired, and I've only been doing this for about a minute now. Anyway, Robin, welcome to us by Skype.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Tell us a little bit about this very clever title, Eat the City.
Well, it's descriptive of the people I talk about in the book. I talk about people who are producing very basic foods in the past and in the present in New York City. So they are fishers and farmers and butchers and people who have been producing food that has made the economy of the city function over centuries.
Well, it's just amazing when you go back in the history of New York City, what has really gone on there as far as food and beverage production. Let's bring up this first image. This is actually the dust jacket of the book that Robin just published, if we can bring that up. And Robin, looking at why write about the creation of food over so many generations and people as going through the many generations from New York City?
You know, I think that a lot of people are interested in producing food in urban areas today. There's been a spate of backyard chicken keeping and beekeeping, and people are interested in growing their own vegetables, and people are experimenting with all different kinds of food production. But not that many people are aware that producing food in cities is nothing new, and it's only in fact very recently that so much of our food has been produced so far away from where most people live.
Well, I think this is something that's very important, and I really love this map that you shared with us. This is actually in your book. We'll keep touting that because it really is an excellent book, very well researched. But looking at all these different areas, tell us a little bit about how you identified these different areas, and then just moving around the city to engage with brewers and beekeepers and fishers and just all the myriads of people that you actually interacted with to publish in this book.
Well, you know, as I began researching this book and meeting more and more people who were producing various different kinds of food, and I also began learning more about historical food production and reading about Brewers Row in Brooklyn, where breweries used to be concentrated, and the old slaughterhouse districts of Midtown Manhattan, and where the last farms were into the 1940s in Upper Manhattan. I really began to view the city in a different way. And so I thought it was important in the book to create a map to show people the same sites that I had visited, so that other people too passing through the city that most people don't think of as a center of food production could also begin to view that city in a different way.
Well, I know the sophistication and the mindset of many New Yorkers, they are actually the center of the universe. And it's really interesting to note that actually they had cattle drives through Midtown New York into the early 1900s of this era. So it really gives you a different perspective of what New York is all about, and the economic as well as the food economy of that whole area.
It's true. I was pretty shocked to learn that until 1960, there were still slaughterhouses in Midtown Manhattan that were operating and requiring animals to march through the streets of Midtown to the slaughterhouses where they were killed. And then that meat was sent downtown to the 14th Street Meatpacking District, which was the largest meat processing center on the East Coast. That was operating into 1960. So it's in recent memory.
Well, looking at this photograph, and this is one of the kind of the iconic scenes you have of New York City and the area surrounding there because of all the water of people fishing. How does that morph into the fish market, and is there enough local catch that it's actually going into the restaurants and the homes in New York?
Oh, fishing is no longer an industry that is happening in any kind of wide-scale way in the city because the waters are so polluted. And it's a story that's happened in American cities all over the country. The cities were centers for industrial production for so long, and there were so many people expelling waste into the waterways that the waters are so polluted that it's in many cities it's very difficult to find fish that are not polluted. But New Yorkers still continue to fish from the waters, and it was actually one of probably the most disturbing story in my book was that so many people who don't have much money are actually relying on fish that they catch from local waters, even though the guidelines suggest that women of childbearing age and children shouldn't eat any fish caught in these waters.
Well, when you think of the high density living and the absolute numbers of people you have in a mega city like New York, it's almost like it's mutually exclusive. You have this high density of population and being able to produce the various food, particularly now with the expansion of vegetables being grown in the city on rooftops. Tell us a little bit about how there's a renewed interest as far as vegetables and maybe where some of those areas are in New York City.
There's a renewed interest in growing vegetables of all kinds, really. People are doing it in their backyards, in community gardens, on rooftops. And there's also some really interesting new things happen in terms of commercial farming in the city. People are using large warehouses, of which there are many, and they're large flat roofs, which have great access to sun to grow food. And there are some places that are using a special lightweight soil, specially manufactured for rooftop farming. Other places are using hydroponic growing on rooftops. I was just visiting a new site, a 65,000 square foot site in the Brooklyn Navy Yard where they're developing a commercial farm. And when I visited, there was a big truck parked down on the street that had a large pipe going up to the roof and was pumping up soil up onto the rooftop. And a man was standing there and spraying out soil onto the surface of the roof, and behind him a team of farmers were planting seedlings as soon as the soil went down. So there are people doing very innovative things and finding them financially viable.
Well, I think it's just really, in many ways, it's heartwarming. I know this is something that Dennis is involved with in the Anacostia area. Dennis, you want to go with one of the questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Robin, I was actually wondering how widespread is the gardening taking place in the area where you're located?
I think it's very widespread, but not all of it is fully in view because people are doing it in window boxes, on fire escapes, in small backyards you can't see from the street, even in community gardens that sometimes are not that accessible if you don't know they're there. So I think it is very widespread, and it happens in cities all over the country. But unless you actually
Well, I think we've just got lost our Skype connection. So Dennis, looking at what Robin is doing in New York City, I know that you're working in Anacostia, do a similar kind of thing.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the Anacostia area, which is the area east of the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C., we have some of the lowest income communities in the city. And as a result, there are some areas that do not have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. So
the food desert concept.
Food desert concept. And this is a great place for people to actually get into gardening.
I think we have Robin back, and Robin, we're going to move from that particular insight over to, many people think of New York City, where you have these young, upwardly mobile, university-educated hipsters, if you will, getting engaged in this kind of urban farming, urban gardening. Based on your research in New York City, what did you find about the types of people that are getting involved there?
You know, I actually found the opposite. I found a real diversity of people who are interested in urban farming, and many people who've been doing it for decades, and many different kinds of communities doing it for decades. It's just getting more attention for a certain group of people who are becoming interested in it now. But I found that over the past 100 years, since New York stopped being an agricultural city or an industrial city, some of the people who have continued and persisted in growing their own vegetables, and sometimes inhospitable circumstances, have been immigrants who've come from rural areas and know how to grow things and kind of insist on doing that, even though they're living in the middle of a big city now, and find ways to make it happen. There are groups of Americans who come from other places in the country where food production is more common, where it's something where people have yards or where people farm and they're used to doing that at home, and they bring that to their city lives. And it's also low-income people who don't have the money to buy the kinds of foods they would like to, and they find that they can grow them themselves. So lots of different groups have always grown food, as well as more traditional hobbyist farmers who also grow food. And as well now, there are new groups of young, educated professionals who are interested in producing food because they're thinking about the low quality of the food that's available in the supermarket and the problems in the food system where so much of what is available is full of pesticides and hormones and other things they don't want to consume. So they feel that growing their own food allows them to really control and understand what went into producing that food. And that's something that other groups of people have known for a long time.
Well, Robin, I think it's fantastic. We'll be back to you shortly, and thank you for being with us and sharing about what's happening in New York City. But we have more to discuss about this topic, and we'd like to thank our viewers for being with us as we look at one of the world's mega cities, New York, and looking at the production of food and everything else that's needed in the food stream. And thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. and the United States as we're looking around the globe in 143 different nations looking for the people as well as the technologies, the products, and the services that are making a difference as we look to provide an even higher quality of life as the world continues to welcome more and more souls onto the planet. Many people know that we're above 7 billion, going towards 9 billion by 2050. And what are we going to do to welcome these individuals so again that they have an even higher quality of life and have all the basic infrastructure that's needed in order to meet their needs, but also to allow them to flourish as we move through the 21st century. Someone who's been thinking about that as it relates to food is a gentleman sitting beside me right now, Dennis Chestnut. Dennis is the Executive Director of Groundwork Anacostia River, D.C., and he's here in case we lose Skype connection with Robin Shulman, who is the author of Eat the City. And Robin, again, I'm going to read this very long title, A Tale of Fishers, Foragers, Butchers, Farmers, Poultry Minders, Sugar Refiners, Cane Cutters, Beekeepers, Winemakers, and Brewers Who Built New York City. That's such a wonderful title, and it shows how extensive was your research. So tell us a little bit about Robin Shulman, and why would someone like you get involved in finding out about the sources of food and beverages in a mega city like New York?
You know, I think my interest began with sort of a personal experience. I had moved to New York City in the early 90s to attend college, and I found myself living over the summer in a neighborhood that was kind of overtaken by drugs. There were a lot of vacant lots there, including next to my building, 12 adjacent vacant lots where buildings had burned down or been demolished and nothing had come in their place. So the land was not in use except for people going in and trading plastic baggies for wads of cash and shooting up and falling asleep in the trash. And then one day I went downstairs and saw that my neighbors were working to clean up the place, and I helped out. I got thick gardener's gloves and got heavy-duty garbage bags and started shoveling up syringes. And that cleanup took months. It was a lot to clean up, but at the end of that time, people started planting things and growing food. And there were also chickens and roosters that people brought in and were using for eggs and for meat. And slowly, when I was waking up to the cry of a rooster in the middle of Manhattan, I started to realize that the reason for this garden and for others that were cropping up all over the neighborhood and were really transforming the neighborhood and bringing people out into the street and changing what was possible in the neighborhood. The reason that these gardens existed is because people wanted to produce food. It wasn't just a cleanup act. And so I started to think more about how food production of different kinds had marked different neighborhoods in the city and the places that I passed by every day, and started to wonder what else I could learn about that and better understand the city around me.
Well, looking at this photograph that we have, the density and the amount of traffic and the noise and all that goes on in a very busy, dynamic city like New York, it's just amazing that you would have food production, all kinds. When you talk about beekeepers and brewers and butchers and all the other activities that goes on actually produced within the city with this high density life. So what really is the view of many people in New York City about all this going on around them? Are they aware of it or encouraging, or is it something that you're really enlightening people about their own communities within the various boroughs of New York City?
I think a lot of people don't really realize the extent of it, both today and also historically. People don't realize that New York was a center of producing all kinds of foods. It was the largest sugar refiner in the United States. It was the biggest brewery in the United States. It was a center of the kosher wine industry. It was a meat processing center. Brooklyn and Queens used to be the two counties in the country that produced the most vegetables. Up to the 1880s, this was agricultural land, and Brooklyn and Queens were leading farmland areas. So people don't realize that our current vision of city life is a very recent one, and other ways of dealing dealing with living in tightly packed urban areas have been phased out, but the way that we live now is a new one.
Well, looking at the natural beauty of New York City, we have people standing there and fishing, and I know about the industrialization and the quality of the waters around. But there's many cities like New York has worked very diligently to actually clean up the environment, and looking at the soil, the water, and the air. And they're using urban gardening and urban farming as one of those methods to do that. In your research, what did you find as far as these changes that are happening within a city like New York that actually is leading to a better quality of environment and a better quality of life?
There are a lot of interesting things happening. There's actually a major effort right now to bring back oysters to New York Harbor because oysters can help filter the water and reduce the pollution. New York City used to be known for its oysters. It used to be that if somebody was traveling to New York City for a visit, people would say, enjoy the oysters, because that was what the city was famous for. But obviously, that is no longer the case. In the early 1900s, there was so much contamination from oil refining in the area. There were stories of just the water itself catching fire because there was so much oil spilling into the water. And there were people who said you could taste which oyster bed an oyster came from because there was a certain petroleum flavor. There was also a time when people were getting typhoid just from handling oysters because there was so much sewage leaking into the harbor. So obviously the oyster industry had to be phased out because the shellfish were so contaminated, but there's a real effort to bring back oysters as a way to clean the harbor. It'll be decades before it's clean enough for us to actually consume the oysters, but they can be a powerful help.
Well, one of the things that's kind of the canary in the coal mine, if you will, is beekeeping in New York City and many of these high-density urban areas. And so this is something that's actually is one of the signs where renewed life, renewed interest in urban gardening, urban farming. Without the bees and other pollinators, you really can't have agriculture and gardening within the area. What did you see in your research as far as the number of beekeepers and how they actually view the city and the changes that are going on there?
Well, it's been really interesting in New York because there was this sudden surge of interest in beekeeping after 2010 when suddenly beekeeping was legalized. So for about a decade, since 1999, beekeeping had actually been illegal in New York, which is not to say that people didn't do it, but they did it surreptitiously and they risked a fine. And then in 2010, it suddenly became legal. And at the same time, there was all this talk of colony collapse disorder. So people were hearing these stories of bees just disappearing from their hives, and they were concerned about the fate of honeybees. And so this phenomenon seemed to be less common in cities, and urban people started to feel that maybe they could help the bees by keeping bees in cities. And so there was this real burst of interest in New York, and a lot of people took up beekeeping. There's something really interesting about it, which is that bees go and extract nectar from flowers that they can find around them. So from neighborhood to neighborhood in a city like New York, you can taste absolutely different honey that they create from the available flowers. So a honey in the Lower East Side will be completely different from a honey in the South Bronx or a honey in Central Brooklyn.
Well,
and it allows you to kind of taste the environment you're in. I actually encountered a group of beekeepers that had more trouble with the environment they were in. Their bees were coming back to the hive, and they were coming back glowing a bright red color, which the beekeepers found really disturbing, and then found that they were producing a honey that was bright red in hue. And they were trying to figure out what was going on. So they were talking to one another. It seemed that all the beekeepers in the neighborhood, Red Hook in Brooklyn, were affected. And they were wondering, was this a particular kind of nectar? Was it a tree that was producing this bright red, sweet substance that the bees were bringing back? Could it even be something that's not natural, like there's a nearby bus yard? Perhaps the bees were going there and sucking up antifreeze, which is sometimes sweet and dyed red. And they were trying to figure out what was happening. But it turned out the answer, when they thought of it, was obvious. There was a maraschino cherry factory around the corner, and the bees were actually flying to the maraschino cherry factory. And instead of doing the hard work of going from flower to flower and seeking out bits of nectar here and there. We're diving into these vats of maraschino cherry syrup, which was high fructose corn syrup, dyed red dye number 40, and that's what they were bringing back to beehives.
Well, this is one of the lessons that when we first met we were talking about, as far as what kind of ideas and concepts are we actually sharing with the public, and looking at this idea of the red honey, if you will. And how does this really impact as far as having urban areas going towards organic farming when you have these various ways to go out and find easy ways of making a living as a bee, or as the proverbial feeding peanuts to the bears? And what may that tell us as far as we move forward in trying to produce food in urban areas?
You know, I love this story because it tells us so much, but one of the things I feel that it tells us is that being closer to the source of food production actually does educate you about the kinds of hazards and perils, as well as the benefits. You actually understand how this food is being produced. The same thing happens in rural areas. I talked to rural beekeepers who've had their bees come back from sucking up syrup from a nearby Coca-Cola plant or a nearby sugar refinery. Rural beekeepers told me that their bees would go to a nearby lumber yard and bring back sawdust instead of pollen and deposit that in the hive. So it's not that this only occurs in urban areas. In commercial agriculture all across the country, there are all kinds of pesticides that bees are exposed to, and that is most likely contributing to the colony collapse disorder. It's just that in urban areas, people thought about it more because it was their bees and they were keeping them, and their neighbors saw what was happening. So I think it's really interesting because it's not that rural areas are safer or less full of hazards, but it's just that in urban areas we see those hazards and we think about them. And so I think that producing food of all kinds in cities can help us to think more, not only about the food we're producing ourselves, but about the food that is produced out of sight and what exactly we demand and want from that food production as well.
Robin, we're going to lose you quickly. We have this image of, I believe this is the rooftop you're talking about, where they're actually blowing truckloads of soil up on the roof to produce the vegetables. But thank you for being with us, Robin Shulman, who is the author of Eat the City. And this is really a history about the foodies and how foodies were able to really develop and expand a mega city, New York. And this is something that's happening all over the globe. If you go into Africa, Asia, Europe, these mega cities are coming as we create the Emerald Planet.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. Of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we look around the globe in 143 different nations. Nations that are taking a lead and also serving as models and living laboratories as far as how we're going to move to 2050 with 9 billion citizens on the globe, address the issues of climate change, environmental quality, both for soil and water, and then also how does both of those relate to cleaning up the air. There are many of these issues that need to be faced as we move through the 21st century in order to be able to bring a higher quality of life and not have a settle for living as far as the globe is concerned. I have a gentleman that's been involved for many years who's sitting right beside me. This is Dennis Chestnut. He's the Executive Director of Groundwork Anacostia River, D.C. And even though he's a very young man, he's working in an area that has 400 years of history, a lot of economic and maritime activity that's gone on in the Anacostia River Basin, Dennis.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about how you formed your organization, and then we're going to move into some of the gardening and fruit tree activities that you have going on.
Absolutely. Well, it's my pleasure to be here again for sure. And Groundwork Anacostia is basically the outgrowth of some committed citizens interested in cleaning up the area where they live. And we came together and figured out a way of putting some resources to that. And the result was an organization that we found, Groundwork USA, and Groundwork Anacostia River, D.C. is a result of that.
Well, we're going to bring up, this looks like a very simple a photograph here, but this is something that you've been working on, and this is about elevating the garden spots. Tell us a little about this and how this actually relates to what we're doing as far as cleaning up the environment, but at the same time providing fresh food and herbs in inner city areas where they say they have these quote-unquote food deserts.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we found out in the urban areas is an abundance of vacant spaces, vacant lots. And what we wound up doing was in working to clean those up, planting those areas also helps to improve the remediation of the soil. But a lot of times food production, growing edible vegetables and fruit directly in those soils is not something that can happen. And so we decided to install what we call raised beds.
Well, looking at this is something we need to tout the fame and the good work of Will Allen up in Milwaukee. And you know, he has this philosophy of growing soil.
Yeah.
And going back to this remediation and these several hundred years of polluting the soils within urban areas, why do we need to really think about growing soil, and what does that really mean, Dennis?
Well, composting is one of those ways that's achieved, and we really need to make sure that we have clean soil for the plants to be actually providing the nutrition. And the remediation takes a longer period of time, so the faster way to get things moving forward in a quicker way is to construct raised beds.
Well, looking at this scene here, we have a number of children involved, and I know that you're working in the schools, you're working with the youth leadership as far as Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, Boys and Girls Clubs, and then bringing in interns that actually work with you throughout the time. So looking at this, it looks like it's something very simple, but it's actually quite profound.
Yeah, it is very simple, and we've come up with a method of making it possible for the average person, regardless of where they live, to be able to grow fruit, vegetables right in their own backyard, on their own patios, wherever they have a space available, as small as 1 square yard, they can do this gardening.
Well, and that's also the name of one of your projects as far as 1 yard of garden. Yes. I really like that. Is that something unique to your organization here in Washington, D.C., or is this a collaborative around the country?
No, this is unique to Groundwork Anacostia. We have a program that we call 1 Yard of Garden. and it is designed to do a number of things. You can grow this produce in your front yard, your backyard, or you can grow it in as small as 1 square yard. This is the concept of this particular project.
Well, looking at this scene, I want to go back. That's why I've left this photograph, Dennis, in the background here. If we can bring up the children working with this raised garden bed that you called it here. Looking at this soil and what they're working with, is this something that actually was brought in from somewhere else? Or is this actually soil that's created through the families or the schools themselves?
Well, on each one of our garden sites, we do have a composting area where we work to put in all of the vegetation, whether it's grass clippings or rather than add to the waste stream, anything that is vegetated, we put in there, and it breaks down and creates soil. But we also work with local farmers who provide clean soil that we bring in and supplement with the compost that we create.
Well, looking at the young people that we have in this actual photograph here, I know that you actually have a scholarship program, been reaching out into the community, and it really goes back to the old 4-H concept of learn by doing, but also educate the parents and the adults in the family through the youth. So it looks like you're reaching back in history, but making something that's very modern and very progressive.
Yes, I mean, there's no point in recreating the wheel completely, and that has been something that has been a way of learning being passed down from generation to generation. And we find this as a way of actually serving the greater good, but also reaching the entire population.
Well, looking at these folks working together, there are many other leadership attributes and many other skills that they're actually learning from each other. What are some of the things that they are demonstrating through this interaction, this teamwork that goes beyond just growing vegetables, herbs, and also fruit?
Well, the teamwork is a very key part of it. But also what it does is it allows for setting goals and achieving outcomes, and really understanding how to organize and put your task in place and working to achieve that. These are all results of something that is, without having to put it in a real textbook format, that they learn by doing. It's called service learning.
Well, looking at the photograph here, also you're looking at just the manual skills, and I noticed that you're using a lot of hand equipment in all this instead of trying to use machinery. And I think this is one of the things that we really forget, how that there's many tools that have been evolving over hundreds of years that are quite effective as we're here and moving through the 21st century.
Yes, and it also allows you to remain independent of the actual need to rely on the power tools. I mean, there are times when if that's necessary, we'll do that. We try to even go with battery operated if we have to use the power. But actually, it builds an appreciation for what the purpose of the tools are, and so we really emphasize using and starting with the manual tools.
Now, looking at many of the youth, and this is not just something about urban youth, but also suburban and rural, many of them are just not connected to the land. They're not connected to this kind of physical activity. It may be great going out and playing football, basketball, soccer or something, or staying in and doing various gaming on the computer. So how do you overcome this barrier as far as, hey, this is for somebody else to do. I'm here to be cool and stay neat throughout the day, and then get off at 5 o'clock and go have fun.
Right. Well, we do a combination thing. This is actually workforce development. It's a model that we use to introduce young people to the outdoors and let them see the opportunity to do other kinds of recreation. Even the work itself is physical, bending, reaching, those kinds of things. But it introduces other kinds of active activities in the outdoors, and at the same time move towards an economic model.
Now, in many of these communities, I know we talked about Ward 7, which is actually where you created your organization. Ward 8, that the obesity rates in some of these wards are over 80%. Yes. There's morbid obesity of in the 30 to 40% range. Many people are not getting out and physically exercising or eating the fresh vegetables. How do you incorporate this, the idea, the notion, the importance of the physical activity along with proper nutrition into the fact that they're out there doing this physical activity?
Well, the way that we construct our program, along with the gardening aspect, we also teach actual food preparation and how to prepare these foods that come in its natural form, so that they know that it doesn't have to come out of a can, out of a box, in order for them to know how to prepare it. And then we can actually introduce how these meals can be simple, but at the same time taste good and have nutritional value.
Well, I know the happy looks on these faces, they're really getting something out of what you're doing, Dennis, and this is something very important. Actually, it's been, the time that we've known each other, it's been very impressive, the progress that you've made and the positive impact that you're making in local communities, but also the Anacostia River. So looking at this balance between focusing on the watershed itself, the Anacostia River, and trying to eliminate these food deserts, how do you think you've been able to marry these? And we have about 40 seconds left to talk about that.
Okay, well, we actually have been able to introduce these communities to the importance of the river. And the river itself was a trading route originally for the Native Americans who lived there. And it has more green space than any other part of the city connected to the river. So we want to really introduce the importance of that resource to the local community.
Well, we're just about out of time, and I just wanted to say thank you, Dennis Chestnut, who is the Executive Director of Groundwork, Anacostia River, DC. And the work that you're doing is just absolutely fantastic. And I think the fact that you're actually working very hard to clean up the river, which is combining soil and air as long as water, is very important to teaching young people to be involved in creating their own food. Thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or a family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half of it.
back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we look in the 143 countries around the globe, looking at those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the products, and the services that are making a difference as we look to accommodate 2 billion new souls on this planet. And so how we're going to provide the food, the fuel, and the fiber to take care of all that, at the same time to grow the green jobs that are very necessary to bring about an ever-expanding economy in our own country of the United States, and also the 196 other nations around the globe that are part of the United Nations. We have a gentleman by the name of Dennis Chestnut, who is the Executive Director of the Groundwork Anacostia River, D.C. Dennis has been with us before, and he's doing just absolutely outstanding work, not only in the Anacostia River Basin, but also in looking at this notion of ground to fork, which is a new movement, somewhat of a new movement, but actually really reaching back into a very long history of Western settlement of 400 years within Washington, D.C. But tell us a little bit about your organization, the Anacostia River DC, and how groundwork became part of that title.
Well, the groundwork movement actually developed in the UK back in the 70s. And it was such a successful movement in the UK that this initiative was...
it means the United Kingdom.
The United Kingdom, yes absolutely. And the United States adapted the initiative in the mid-90s and began introducing the development of groundwork programs in cities throughout the United States.
Well, I know you've added this to it. When we first met some years ago, you had the Anacostia River DC program, and you wanted to expand that so that you're not only protecting the river and the watershed that's there, but also to address the issues of proper fresh food and herbs specifically in the inner city area. You come out of Ward 7, which is we could say is a challenged area as far as nutrition is concerned, obesity and other types of things. But yet you've made real headway there, and there's a lot of positive things coming out of this whole groundwork Anacostia River DC.
Yes, and one of the ways that we achieve, a lot of what we achieve is by partnering and through partnerships and collaborations. And we now even have, of course, we've established some urban gardens in the city, in the Ward 7 and Ward 8 area of Anacostia. And we also now are working with local mom and pop stores to get them to have fresh produce in their stores and making that more available to the residents who live there.
Well, looking at this photograph we have here, I think this is maybe a photograph of you actually talking about these raised vegetable beds. Tell us a little bit about that. I actually was there and witnessed this, which was absolutely amazing how fast you can put it together, but not only is it very simple, but it has a very profound impact on families and communities in urban areas.
Well, yeah, these raised beds, we have designed them to be very simple and easy for the average person to be able to construct. We give these demonstrations. This was at a gardening forum that's held annually in February every year called Rooting DC. And we are able to show how these beds are easily put together by the average person without special tools, and they can begin gardening all in the same day.
Well, I want to leave this. I'm going to actually go back to this photograph here. My understanding was this is lumber that you pulled out of an old building, and you're looking to recycle as much lumber as you possibly can to make these. And what was amazing to me is that going to this other photograph here, I showed up with this. I had a special invitation. There were over 700 people in the room.
Oh yeah.
That was just absolutely amazing number of people. And you had, because I actually counted, there was about 125 people listening to your first seminar, and that was not the only one you did that day. So what do you think is motivating and generating this amount of interest in an area, because this is not a high-income, affluent area. These are people that are, working day to day, but yet are taking a real interest in their community, but also in the nutrition that they have for their families.
Yeah, well, there are a number of things that are driving this whole importance of eating healthy and nutritious food. But some of it is even economic. Folks the resources are actually tightening, and the costs are being reduced by someone being able to do more for themselves and actually producing their own fruit, vegetables, and herbs right at home. And they feel a little more comfortable that they don't have the pesticides and other kinds of things that would that they don't want to consume. So,
well, looking at this, Dennis, not only, and when you talked about the cost, it's just like the aspect of insecticides, pesticides, chemical fertilizers are becoming more and more expensive as the cost of petroleum increases, and of course, the whole notion of wars and rumors of wars increases the cost of all that. And but not only just the cost, the fact is that it seems like people are genuinely becoming aware that they need to know exactly where their food comes from.
Oh yes, and we have experienced some things in recently that has really indicated that folks know that they cannot rely totally on the modern technology. Storms have taken the power sources out, and food storage has become an issue, so people are beginning to understand how important it is to be as self-reliant and self-productive as possible.
Well, looking at putting together this raised garden bed, and as you know, we've been involved with what's called Earthbox, which is actually headquartered in Florida, and through one of our affiliates out in the South Pacific, developed, and we even called it Earthbox. It was one of the 100 best ideas several years ago through the World Bank. We were very proud of ourselves, Dennis, and then all of a sudden we found out there's a thing called Earthbox.
All right, wonderful.
So I immediately called the company and apologized profusely. They only bashed me a couple of times, and so we're actually promoting them in the Power for Peace, which is becoming more independent as far as the water and the food and the energy. But looking at the construction of this box, what's going on here, and how can young people do this with their families or within their schools?
Sure. Well, what we've done is we've developed a pattern where these can be put together actually without using any connectors. They can be put together and disassembled and moved to another location very easily, because they are they're kind of like Tinker Toys, if I'm dating myself. They just come together because of manufactured joints that we put in the wood.
Yeah, it's like mitering the joints. Absolutely, and being able to overlap. And actually, looking at this slide here, these are actually stronger than if you're using the fasteners, nails, screws, wood screws in this. And also you're eliminating cost, but also you're allowing these old timbers to be recycled and reused.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things you have to keep in mind in reference to a joint, rather than just putting two ends together, that makes for a stronger constructed item. So it's just like those old drawers where you had the mitered joints. We do the same thing with the raised beds.
Now, in educating the youth and teaching them about this, I know that you're talking about how to take the food and cook those, and actually we'll invite you back, and we need to have something about that as well. But looking at what is the different skills they need to know as far as taking one of these raised beds and actually producing a tomato or green beans, peas, or something like that.
Well, in the construction of the raised bed, they learn quite a bit from how it's constructed, number one. They even calculate the amount of cubic yards or cubic feet of soil required, so it's some math involved. And then they understand how to use material that will allow for the water to drain, so that the soil doesn't become compacted and will continue to be able to work to the benefit of raising the vegetables and herbs that they plant.
I know that many people, they just think you just have to saturate the soil with water and water them every day. And many people don't realize that actually the plants can get lazy like human beings. Absolutely. If you give them too much water. They sit there, and after a while the roots can literally just rot.
That's right, that's right.
So how do we get these lessons across about how to nurture these plants? And there's a number of religious philosophies that look at, you know, a tomato plant or a potato as a being just as animals and human beings, and that needs to be cared for the same as humans.
Yes, and the thing to keep in mind is, and this is one of the things we actually do with the young people, we let them know that anything will grow if it gets the combination of water, light, and is in some, soil or some kind of healthy medium. But it has to be nurtured, it has to be weeded, it has to be mulched, and it has to be cared for. So that's an important ingredient to include.
Well, let's talk about mulch. This is something that I advise to anyone doing gardening. Many people say, no, I'm going to get termites, I don't like it, it's too ugly, and you know, all these other kinds of things. What is the benefit of having mulch, and how does that allow us to actually cleanse the environment as far as carbon and other kinds of exhausts that are coming from automobiles and buildings for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And mulch does a number of beneficial things. It one helps retain moisture, so that's one way of reducing the amount of watering that you have to do by having mulch. That mulch actually holds that moisture and allows it to saturate into the soil at a slower basis. And then the whole photosynthesis process actually is increased by the use of mulch. So you know, these are all scientific methods, and the young people are fascinated by the amount of science that they learn from being engaged in this process.
Well, one of the things, Dennis, is learning science, but having fun doing it and being able to produce actually an active product. We only have about 10 seconds left. What would you like to share with our domestic international audience?
Well, everyone just continue doing the natural things and change these places so we can change lives. That's the main thing.
Well, we're going to continue to talk on, Dennis. I think it's just fantastic.